All right. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to be talking to you all about digital ebook lending here, and this is joint work with my co-authors Boya Wang and Sunoo Park. Okay, so traditional book lending, perhaps you're aware. How does it work? You go to a library, maybe you register with some information that shows that you live in the area, and if they have the book in stock and you go to borrow it, then you'll get it back. And this functions in part due to the first sale doctrine, which essentially, if the library has given you the copy of The Hungry Hungry Caterpillar, they're not going to be able to loan it out to anyone else. And so, wow, we didn't break copyright infringement, or we didn't do copyright infringement. Now, once we go to digital lending, it gets a little more complicated. I stress the word generally here because there are plenty of different types of schemes out there. But what I'm showing here is kind of like a vague abstraction of licensing schemes. So how does this work? Well, if I had an ebook just as a PDF, I could just copy it, and I, as a malicious library, could loan it out to as many users as I want. So how do the distributors or publishers work with the library to ensure access control? In light of this, they use oftentimes some sort of intermediary platform. You can think of this as OneDrive in the case of Libby. We've also seen Adobe used a lot of the time, and Google Drive, and there are plenty of others. The problem is these platforms can see the borrowing patterns of the users, and oftentimes even the accessing patterns, the reading patterns of the user. And this is not great. What we would like instead, as a gold standard, is a form of digital lending that looks more similar to how physical lending works, where I just go into the library, I ask for an ebook copy of it, and I get it back. However, we've seen, many times over that this has been attacked as a valid way. So I give a picture here of the parties in Hachette versus Internet Archive. This was during COVID with their open library and their emergency library system. I won't get too deep into it, but crucially, there were prominent arguments as part of this lawsuit that emerged doubting whether CDL, this controlled digital lending, could even exist while not breaking copyright. So we ask, is there a better way? Can we satisfy both the access control needs of the publishers with the kind of privacy concerns of the libraries? And so along the way, we do an interview study of 11 participants across library staff, and activists in the space. From this, we extract out a concrete model and 11 definitions for what private and transparent digital lending could look like. We design a protocol using mostly plug-and-play crypto that achieves these definitions and satisfies this model. And then we micro-benchmark this to show how easy it could be to adopt. So our interview study, as I mentioned, we are mostly looking at library staff and library activists. Our reasoning for this is essentially that the status quo as it stands is more beneficial to the distributor side and is broadly accepted by distributors. From that, we extracted out 8 overall themes. We had these hour-long semi-structured interviews, 5 of which of these themes worked toward our system design. Most of these you can see the center around kind of issues that are found in the status quo. Now, extracting our model, remember that our whole goal here is to get rid of this intermediary. I'm very much abstracting this here, and I'm happy to talk about it more in the poster session. We are going to keep our user, we're going to keep our library, and instead of just considering a distributor, we can have any sort of outward auditor, right? So that's our V here. In addition, we have our e-reader as before, but now instead of our platform kind of serving as an intermediary, we're going to make use of this sort of catalog, this log BB, as a transparency log instead. So what are we going to want from this? Essentially, we want anyone to be able to read it and tell that the library isn't claiming to overloan any books, but only an e-reader can check that its individual records are represented correctly on the log. And so, in theory, both of these together should ensure that the log is correct and is not overloading. Along the way, I'll also mention that we have this new notion of copy deterrence within an e-reader. This is essentially kind of, we don't want to write a DRM paper, so we're looking at this instead. I'm happy to talk about that. That was a very cool thing, although it's somewhat auxiliary. We extracted out 11 definitions from this model. Broadly, correctness, soundness, and privacy for each of our 3 main functionalities here, and our copy deterrence definition. You might notice that these numbers don't add up to 11. You have to split apart some of them in certain ways to make it make sense. Our protocol, I'm going to keep it a little high level here just for time considerations. You can, if you look at these building blocks and you stare at it long enough, you can probably get something that's not too far off. But broadly here, we use key derivation functions and Merkle trees for adding new user-reader key pairs. Crucially, they need a key pair for each reader that you read on. And then we use signature schemes, collision-resistant hashes, and NISX for the transparency log and adding each individual log on it. And finally, we use TEs, sort of our security within the reader for this sort of copy deterrence notion, which is essentially just to say that you can't do any better than basically rewriting the book. We also did micro benchmarks, as I mentioned. We only implemented our borrow and our audit functionalities here. This is just because these will tend to be the majority of the kind of compute that's needed for it. Return is almost the same as borrowing, just slightly different. I will note, especially here, that for the scale of the largest libraries in the world, around 50 million circulations per month. That's for like digital plus physical overall. A full outside audit takes about like less than 8 days on our MacBook Pro, which can be done monthly in the background. And I do want to note here that this sort of computation in the background running like this is pretty standard in libraries for example, archival and data integrity there. So finally, I'll talk about some takeaways and open questions. The main takeaway I want to highlight here is the second one, which is that libraries and librarians have this long-held kind of like norms around privacy. They're well acquainted with book bans and censorship and various other concerns, and so they have these rigorous notions of privacy that just exist mostly separate from kind of our digital technology one. And so pulling out kind of these formal cryptographic definitions from these interviews that we performed was actually very tricky, very, very tricky, and took a lot of redoing, but it was very useful. And I want to highlight that like their interviews, despite not being on a technical level at all, really did inform the technical underpinnings of this. So finally, I want to leave off with some open questions because I think there is a lot that still could be done here. First of all, we don't consider support for like multiple e-readers per user. You could do this if the library has like multiple copies of one book and then lends them out to each user e-reader. Obviously, this is not the best. So it'd be nice to just inherently provide that functionality. We'd also like to extend the scheme to sort of private licensing. What we found from the interviews is that a lot of libraries see licensing and digital lending and physical lending as sort of complementary to each other. Licensing, for example, is more elastic to demand. So at the beginning, you can get a bunch of books and then you don't have to hold them around once they're not trendy anymore. So getting private licensing is still important even despite this. We could also consider privacy against libraries. For now, we were mainly considering physical lending as sort of our gold standard that we wanted to reach, but you could easily consider privacy beyond what physical libraries ensure, and that's, could be done for sure, although we didn't. Obviously, there's, more in-depth implementations and deployment. There's a lot of like, political issues with doing this, I'm sure. But I also want to highlight these private statistics. This is something we thought that we were easily going to be able to do. But through our interviews, we actually couldn't find any sort of statistics that librarians really felt that they were missing. So I think this actually would require some more sort of interviewing and discussion to figure out what is actually desired in this space. But once you have that, I'm sure you could add this in without too much issue. So that is all I have. Obviously, I had to gloss over a lot of it because there's a lot of different parts, but I encourage you to talk to me after at the poster session or check out the paper online via the QR code. Thank you.